Hello, everyone, and welcome to episode 170 of the Citrix Session. I'm Bill Sutton, your host for this session. I have with me, as is typical, Andy Whiteside, CEO of XenTegra, Jeremy Myers, and Todd Smith, both of Citrix. Andy, you want to say hello? Or?
Yeah, I want to hit the commercial and the tagline. So the commercial is, if you're working with a Citrix partner, or you don't have one, or you have one that doesn't do podcasts and doesn't do other value add things, bring you to conferences. We're going to Microsoft Ignite, Bill, in about 40 days or so?
Yeah, something like that. Middle of November. Yep.
If you're listening to this, you do Citrix, therefore you do Microsoft. Are you going? Did your current partner get you a pass to Microsoft Ignite? If not, maybe you work with us going forward.
Yep. Let us know you're going. We've got some events we can invite you to potentially.
And the way we kind of sum all this up in this podcast is, content with context. Right. That's why we do this, because it's one thing to read a blog. It's another thing to talk about with a bunch of friends. And, most people maybe don't have a bunch of friends. We got us right here. There's 4 of us. Just consider yourself as the listener, one of us.
Exactly. Todd, you want to say hello?
Yeah, I'm honored to be part of the 3 best friends here. Me and my 3 best friends. So thanks for having us again. It's always one of the highlights of my week is spending Monday afternoon recording this with you guys, and then I typically spend Saturday morning on my drive to Maine, kind of listening to this podcast and a couple of other ones. But this is the first one out of the gate when it comes to this, because it is, even for someone who works at Citrix who thinks they know a lot about it, the conversation really brings out a lot of the things that I really didn't know or wanted to know more about. Thanks for having us on.
Of course, Todd. We love having you on. Jeremy, mute man.
Of course. In the back of my head, I always think of Wolf of Wall Street. One of us. One of us. All right. that could go in a terrible direction. But I will say this, right before, so we brief on this, and we go through just a little peek behind the curtain here. Is we go through the blogs and we kind of think about which ones to hit on. And we actually just flirted with the idea of redoing one that we did 6 months ago. So we might do that here in a week or two, where we talked about the platform license. And I know it was, at least for me and Todd, pretty fresh for us. And so, this might be one that we redo in a week or so, which I'm pretty fired up about because there's a lot going on. But the reason I point that out is tomorrow, Bill and I are actually leading a virtual webinar, which is all about platform updates. So again, and yet another commercial. I think maybe Bill gets this out. If you haven't been to the website, go to XenTegra.com/events. And October the 8th, we've got an update. We'll talk through all these things as well. So pretty excited about that. That's tomorrow.
And if you miss it, you can get it on the recording on our YouTube channel.
Right. That's right. But if you're available, go to XenTegra, like Jeremy said, XenTegra.com/events, and find it for October 8th and click on Learn More and register, and you can join tomorrow at 1 p.m. Jeremy and I will be talking about a lot of this stuff. So
guys, the number one reason why I was so adamant that we should revisit the platform thing is 2 things. One, I just came out of the executive briefing 2 weeks ago at the Citrix HQ in Florida, and it was clear to me that all the customers that were there with us, they're not getting all this. It's not landing. And there's things that are changing. For example, like the secure private access, Citrix is really bringing the enterprise browser technology as a forward-thinking part of that platform going forward. And maybe that wasn't the case in March when we did that as a podcast. I think the thing about platforms for companies that are doing it the right way is it is going to be changing, and we should probably revisit the platform conversation maybe quarterly.
I think you're right, actually. So without stealing too much thunder, there were some things that weren't in the platform, that weren't even in HMC, that are now in the platform. So there's a tease for you. But I think the one thing I've learned about this company is it's constantly shifting and tweaking and ever forward, as well. So that's probably not a terrible idea, Andy.
And I think as companies like Citrix and others move to like these platform type complete bundles, as they add technology, it's going to change a lot. It's not like they float something out there, it's a separate thing, and then it ends up in the bundle. In the modern technology platform concept, it ends up in the platform day one, and we're going to have to call it out in order to make sure people don't miss it.
Nailed it.
Yeah, and I think to add on to that, it's the constantly understanding that we need to continue to provide value to customers. And what we think is valuable to a customer may not be accurate, but at the same time, if a customer comes back and says, hey, we want this product, we want this platform because of this feature, they have now decided the value statement on that, as opposed to us having to go tell them there's some value there. So, definitely the messaging does change a little bit, but it's all messaging based on what the customer needs.
Yep. Thanks, Todd.
Yeah.
All right. So the blog we're going to cover today is entitled Announcing Citrix VDA for Mac OS. It's by our friend Sridhar Mullapudi, who's I believe he's the general manager of the Citrix business unit or the Citrix product management. What is his title, Jeremy? Do you know off the top of your head?
He is the general manager for the Citrix VDA.
Okay, great. So this article, and we'll get into it a little bit deeper here, really this comes down to now we can deliver the Mac OS as a desktop session from a Mac OS to any device. Number of years ago, I sat in a you know what I'm going to say? I sat in a
I do.
In a Synergy keynote, and this was demonstrated as a virtual instance. Newsflash, this is not a virtual instance, but Jeremy, why don't you give us a high-level overview?
Well, listen, let's take a step back real quick. That announcement felt a lot like, and maybe this is unfair comparison,
right?
Like the time Steve Jobs got on stage and said, hey, I've got this thing that is a messaging device, a cell phone, and an internet communicator, all in the same thing. That's when he introduced the iPhone, and people went bananas. I remember that Synergy where we talked about virtualizing the Mac OS and treating that like a VM. You could do remote access and the whole 9 yards. And people went nuts. And I will tell you that even as recent as maybe 2 or 3 years ago, I was still getting asked if we could do a demo for that. And I'm like, well, the answer is no. That was never a thing. It was always an issue with the EULA from Apple, meaning you couldn't virtualize the Mac OS unless it was on Apple hardware. And oh, by the way, I think Apple stopped making the what did they call their hardware back then? They had rack mount servers that you could virtualize on.
Okay.
I forget, but either way, long story short, we still can't do that. You can't virtualize the Mac OS. You probably could do it maybe on Mac hardware and it'd be supported, but that's not what we're talking about here. What we are talking about at a high level is think of remote PC for Mac OS. So now we can install the VDA software onto a Mac OS and broker connections to it with HCX, policies, analytics, all the things you would expect out of a Citrix session. But we can do that brokering through Citrix. So I log into Workspace, I see an icon that is my Mac desktop. I click it and it's brokering me into a Mac of some kind sitting somewhere, much like, anything CVAT or DAS, it could be sitting anywhere, but that's what it is. That's what it is in a nutshell.
Before we started, Todd made a comment about helping customers understand what they need, what they want, or the platform bringing stuff to you that maybe you didn't realize was even possible. I think this one to me lines up exactly with that, because my immediate response was, this doesn't matter to most of our customers. But then I started thinking about developer use cases where a lot of it's happening on Macs. I'm like, oh yeah, well, how are they going to do that at scale?
Oh, 100%. And so that's my first thought. Like I get so caught up in the how sometimes that I forget the why. And I'd argue that's probably the first use case is just remote development, right? So it hits on here in the document itself. So with all the customers that I've talked to about this, that's probably the top one. Could I do it with, video professionals, multimedia professionals? Sure. In fact, there's an integration with a platform called Mac Stadium, which if you can imagine a data center of Macs of various types and sizes and GPUs and things like that. I mean, that's exactly what that is. So, you could do a lot of that remote, and you could have that, the graphics, available to that session to really support that. But I think development is probably the biggest one.
Well, and if you think back at it, some of these remote PC use cases, where you're going back to physical hardware. This is something we've been doing for 12 to 15 years. I mean, this goes back to the Gabe Correo days of evangelizing the value of being able to connect to a physical device that's not in the data center always. It could be something sitting on someone's desk. Oftentimes it was a snow day scenario where, people can't get to the office, but they don't have, they need to access a device that was sitting on their on their physical desktop, in their cube someplace. Sometimes it was applications that were only installed on that physical PC that you need to get to remotely, and it didn't make sense to virtualize them. This is a use case that has really been around for quite a long time. This is the first time we've actually been able to really leverage a infrastructure partner like Mac Stadium to help us deliver, once again, an additional corner case that customers have been asking for, but we really have never been able to deliver at scale.
Right. So is there just so I know, is there any limitation here? It doesn't have to be something like Mac Stadium. It can be literally a fleet of Macs that might be sitting on a desk or desks at a corporate office. And it's just very similar, like you said, Jeremy, to the remote PC case. For example, if they're running a specialized Mac app, which is one of the 3 bullets that are in the actual blog article itself, it would enable a user to maybe is home caring for a sick child or something to be able to access their Mac, their high-powered Mac from their home office.
Yep. So that's the use case. I mean, I think through maybe an education use case where you've got, design labs inside of, maybe a university you want to provide access to.
Right.
That again, it's not limited to Mac Stadium. It could be the Macs that's in AWS. So again, you can buy Mac from Amazon as a platform.
Yeah,
you happen to have it sitting in, your own data center. You could, tee up a few of these in your own data center. Again, it's just the VDA. It's all it is, right?
Right.
There's a workflow for standing it up. I think there's some caveats just to be aware of on what is actually supported. So the biggest thing, and this really shouldn't be difficult anymore because it's been out, is number one, it only supports Apple Silicon, right? So you can't do this on Intel-based Macs. It's got to be Apple Silicon, right? So a different platform. What's nice is it is supported across every licensing variation we sell. So whether or not you are the platform license, whether or not you're the hybrid multi-cloud license, or even if you're, Citrix Private Cloud, which is the on-prem version, supported by DAS, supported by private cloud as well. So, essentially anything you bring to it is going to work. From a workspace app perspective, you'll probably want the most recent version, so at least a 42 version or a 24 version of workspace app of some kind. So something this year. But it just went GA, in fact. So it's been tech preview for, would you say, Todd, maybe a year? Now it's live.
It's been about a year.
So it's literally just as simple as putting the VDA on the right kind of Mac hardware and creating a machine catalog delivery group within your cloud tenant or your on-prem tenant, and then your users can connect. What about authentication?
I think this is where it's interesting. So I think the holdup to this has been the fact that it's non-domain join support.
Right.
And so there's some pieces that you'll need to do to prep for that. So I'm looking through the latest documentation right now. I don't think the steps are too heavy, but you do have to turn on some WebSocket pieces on your DDC if you're using the on-prem DAS.
Right.
If you're doing or on-prem CVAD, if you're doing something in DAS, I think there's actually a workflow you've got to do. There's like an enrollment token. So there's a workflow that's got to be created just to support doing this.
Okay.
From a Mac, because again, most of your Macs are not going to be domain joined, which is important to be aware of.
So there's some hoops to jump through, but it's nothing significant.
It's nothing significant. Yeah, it's something to be aware of. That's all.
Yeah, for sure. So when we move along in the article itself, it does talk about what we were mentioning earlier, which is the partnership with Mac Stadium as well as Amazon EC2 Mac instances. There's a diagram in here. Either one of you guys want to kind of take a walkthrough of this real quick? We might have already done it.
I don't know that we necessarily talked about it, but it's pretty straightforward, right? So your Mac desktops are going to register. So you have the VDA on the Mac. Of course, you've got to point those VDAs to a DDC, and it's pretty straightforward. If it's on-prem, you're pointing to your on-prem DDCs, and if you're a DAS customer and you've got it deployed that way, then you're going to point it to your cloud connectors, and which will do the proxy on the back end. In the case of like Mac Stadium, again, if you've not seen this, I would say go Google what Mac Stadium data center looks like, and it's exactly what you imagine. It's rows and rows of Macs is what it is, and so the simple version is a Mac, an iMac. I mean, Mac Mini.
Yeah.
But heck, if you want a Mac Pro, they got Mac Pros and Mac Studios there too.
Very interesting. Great. So there's the blog article next talks about getting started guide and documentation and other elements that are related to this solution. That's really the end of the article. It's a pretty quick one.
Yep.
What did we miss, guys? Anything else we should bring to light?
No, it's actually fairly straightforward. And I think what's interesting is a lot of the minutia, maybe some things that are unique to the Mac VDA version as opposed to like the regular Windows or Linux VDA.
Right.
Is a lot of the tokening, the supports, the non-domain join stuff. I mean, it's all a part of the wizard that is the Mac VDA. So it takes a little of the guesswork. And I got to be honest, the documentation is actually fairly straightforward. So nothing stopping you from just,
guys. And you may not know the answer. I'm literally on the Mac Stadium website right now requesting somebody call me. Where do partners like us fit into this equation?
Man, I don't know the answer to that. I will tell you that we do have a point of contact with Mac Stadium now, so I'm sure we could broker, some sort of connection, whatever is needed. But I'm not exactly sure what their partner program looks like. I will say this though, like being on the website, you get a sense of how much a monthly bill is on some of these Macs. Though, of course, I go right straight to the high end, and there's a model that's got all of the Mac you can handle graphics wise, and it's a good $630 a month.
Yeah.
But let's be fair, that's a 24 core, 2 terabyte SSD Mac Studio. So that's one of the big guys.
Yeah. 128 gigs of RAM. So, and you can also do this through their partnership with it, because you can run these as AWS instances as well, right? That's what we saw here.
You can. Yep. You certainly can. You certainly can.
Guys, I don't know if we covered it. Is this under the universal multi-hybrid cloud license, or is it under the platform license, or both?
All of the above. All of the above, Andy. Yep. We touched
as well
on
as private cloud.
Private cloud, on-prem, universal hybrid multi-cloud, regardless of how you deploy, CPL as well.
Yeah.
You guys see a use case here in education?
I do see a use case for that.
Yeah, absolutely. There's some use cases for education. This has been one of those things where anything that has specialized Mac software from an application side of it, number one is it's rolling that out to a fleet of students or a fleet of devices can sometimes be a challenge, very expensive challenge. The other piece of it is it's really geared towards that non-persistent user all the time. So education would be a perfect one for this because the thing is, it's typically for a specific class or a specific course that the student's taking that needs that one-time specialized software.
Yeah. Well, what about the use case where, let's say you have a marketing department that has to have brand new Macs every year or two, and it's this unsustainable model, and you're giving them a decent thin client and a Citrix connection, and then you turn this into an OpEx versus a CapEx story.
Yep. Yeah, it's a good use case. I mean, we've all been to conferences where you have someone that walks up with a Mac and plugs it into the overhead projector, and it screws up for the next 3 presenters all have problems because they have to swap out hardware. Now all of a sudden you can put a thin client device in there, have them connect to either a Mac-based OS VDA or a Windows or Linux-based VDA. Right? That endpoint now becomes a moot point. You don't need to go and say, hey, I can only use this type of endpoint to do my presentation. Take that and put that into something like a conference room or any of these public access devices. You're connecting to a virtual desktop someplace. Mac OS the VDA for Mac OS that we're talking about, just happens to be on a physical device back in the data center someplace.
Right. Yeah. Well, it's funny because as you just keep talking through it, there's use cases, and there's a large percentage of companies out there that have some population of Macs that, whether this is right for them or not, Maybe, maybe not, but somebody needs to be talking about it.
Well, I think one of the things, the key thing, I mean, when you look at this, it really kind of demonstrates again the benefit of leveraging the Citrix model of having your workloads and the processing occur in the data center or somewhere secured versus having all of the multimedia files, video for like an advertising agency sitting on a bunch of different laptops, centralize them, require them to connect to the high-end Macs over a thin protocol, and then that way that data stays in the data center, stays within the four walls or wherever or in a cloud. You're not carrying them around with you and risking getting a laptop stolen or damaged or lost.
Yeah, Andy, I can tell you a use case right now. It's a large Ivy League university here in the Northeast that basically they have challenge with professors walking in with whatever device, plugging it into the projection system, and not being able to get it connecting on a regular basis or simple, easy to use basis, right? To the point where they actually have staff sitting in each of the buildings, each of the education instruction buildings that are there to just deal with that connectivity issues. If they could take and put a thin client in each of the podiums and have the professor connect to their virtualized Windows desktop, virtualized Linux desktop, in this case, a Mac desktop, that solves that problem. That is a human capital savings right there.
Right.
It not only that, but it also reduces that lost time at learning, right? So, you're spending a lot of money to send your kids to an Ivy League school to find out that the first 15 minutes of every class is dealt with the professor trying to connect his laptop.
That leads me to a whole nother discussion around just, device cost in general. I should say this in the intro during the commercial. We've got a program where you can, for free or a paid for version that's not that expensive, you can have someone come in and do a study to figure out what your actual endpoint devices are costing you. Todd, Jeremy, I've been around this business for 15 plus years now as a consultant or a reseller or as working for Citrix. I've found two customers that entire time that could tell me how much a device cost them, the actual cost of it, not just the physical, but provisioning it, deprovisioning it, everything, life cycle of it. The customers need to know that. How do you if you're spending too much on a PC or a Mac? How do you know what the options are financially if you don't know what you're actually spending today?
Well, and the biggest challenge area is that the hardware costs have really kind of dropped. It's the management costs associated with that. So several years ago, Gartner came out with a study that basically said it was $3,500 per user per year for an end user, for the end user to get their compute environment. They factored in a whole bunch of things. Probably one of the cheapest things on there was the actual cost of the hardware. Mm-hmm. It's how do you deal with updates? How do you deal with, migrations? How do you deal with the data security components of it? Just that basic operating, the care and feeding of the device adds up. If you swap it out and make it self-managed or make it easier to manage without the amount of investment in the human capital piece of it, it's going to be huge.
Yeah, I'd be curious to know, we've got customers who have a chargeback model to like some of their internal cost centers. Mm-hmm. So, listen, Todd, you're in one of the cost centers and I give you a PC. Certainly it's the piece of hardware, but there's the agents, there's the processing time, there's the man hours. There's a formula there for sure. It'd be interesting to catch up with a handful of those different customers and kind of feel that out.
So if I go back to my Wayback Machine, years and years and years ago, we used to charge $25 per user per month was the IT support costs for us to be able to manage that device, right? So you figure out that's, $300 a year type of thing. That didn't include the connectivity, that didn't include the server space and the storage space and all that stuff, or the endpoint device itself. That was purely on the management layer. You factor in the cost of a new laptop or a new desktop. Nowadays, everyone's got dual monitors, everyone's got webcams, everyone's got all the other bells and whistles on there. It adds up very quickly. But that $25 per user per month fee was you know, I will say 20 plus years ago. But it probably does carry through.
Hey, Todd, are you factoring in the cost of a ransomware attack in that one these days?
Not back then, but
No.
yes, you'd have to factor that in. You'd have to factor in the protection, the security that goes on top of there, and probably put money aside for in case a ransomware does happen, or the recovery costs would have to get factored in. At some point in time, you need an economics professor to come in and actually do the calculations for you.
And then you factor in the the political fallout, the customer exposure fallout, and it's it's limitless, priceless.
Yep.
Yeah.
So one thing I don't think we covered is how do I get the VDA onto the Mac? So I don't want to go too deep in. So you could certainly do it by hand, and I'm guessing a lot of people do, but a lot of folks have management of these Macs, right? And so it's not uncommon to have a platform like Jamf managing your Macs. And so I'll tell you that inside the documentation that's out on the website is a walkthrough on how to, basically download the VDA and leverage Jamf to roll that guy out. So there's some scripting involved that Jamf takes care of. In fact, I think the documentation actually outlines what that script looks like. So it's as simple as this is what the command line needs to look like. There might be a couple of runtime, so some pieces that need to be on as prerequisite. But it's pretty straightforward, actually. So all good. It's out there on the website under installation. There's a section on specifically rolling this out with endpoint management. And the scripting itself are just command line arguments that, of course, you could feed into Jamf. But if you've got a different platform, there's the script will work elsewhere. Either it's just automating the whole process.
Very interesting. Good information, Jeremy. Thanks. All right. Any other topics on this subject, guys?
Bill, I don't think so. I think we've covered this specific subject. I'll add to this whole concept around the subject that this just further proves that Citrix is investing in the technology piece. Yeah. Amazing to hear from one of our clients the other day, one of our own salespeople the other day, and then at the executive briefing of the day, the customers that were there. The impression is Citrix is not investing in technology. They're actually making it status quo and then charging people more money for that status quo. It's the opposite of that.
Yes.
Yeah, and yes. I think to that point, Andy, there's you have to look at some of the announcements we've made around the release cycles and things like that. If you look at the past year and a half, the over 500 customer requested enhancements have actually been implemented. That's not including all of the technology enhancements that have been done, that have been put in place that didn't have specific customer requests associated with it. We hear an awful lot about technical debt, and that being hey, I'm on an operating system that's 15 years old that hasn't been patched and hasn't been updated and things like that. I mean, that all adds to that technical debt. And part of it is because there's been a lot of companies out there that have basically just said, hey, we're just going to look at the forward in the future, as opposed to making sure that what's already there continues to work. So that technical debt erasure that we've been doing as well has been huge.
Yeah,
and Todd, I'll say it. A lot of companies are just cashing in on what they got, trying to find the next brand new thing out of the blue.
And here's the other thing I'll say too. So Todd's right. I mean, I don't know that I've ever seen the pace of innovation at Citrix as quickly as it is right now. Just the engagement that we have with product management around RFPs is incredible right now. So we're taking feedback from customers and implementing that in the product in a way I've never seen before. But I think more importantly, listen, there's only one of me. There's only one of everyone on my team. And, I cover a huge swath of the U.S. Listen, if you don't have a partner
in Canada,
that is absolutely right, Todd. But if you don't have a partner that is letting you know about this in the way that XenTegra does, then you need to have a conversation with your partner, because there's a lot coming out. XenTegra is doing a really good job of making sure customers understand that. And if you're not getting that from your partner, I know someone on this call. So just make sure that you're holding your partner accountable as well. I think that's how maybe we end it here.
I would sum that up as, if that's the case, Jeremy, you ain't got no partner.
Yeah, and to attest to that, I think all you have to do is look at the XenTegra.com events page and see how active XenTegra is, and then go pick another partner and take a look at their page and see how much more XenTegra is doing. And it's not just around the Citrix products, right? It's about products across the board. Andy and the team at XenTegra are really doing a phenomenal job of helping and doing what they can to educate consumers as much as possible.
Yep. All right, folks. Thanks for joining today. We will see you again next week.
And Todd, that for a lot of people, that's setting a high bar. That's table stakes for us.
Yeah.
All right, Bill, thanks.
Thank you all.